Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the Freedom of Information Masterclass. My name is Marcus Rowie and I'm an event coordinator at the Walkley Foundation. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Just a bit of housekeeping. All attendees today have their video and microphones muted, so we can't see you, we can't hear you. However, if you would like to ask a question, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to use it throughout the presentation and type in your questions. Due to the number of attendees, we may not get to every question today, but we will try our best. After the event, we're going to send out a really brief feedback form with a few questions just to help the Walkley Foundation understand a few things about these online classes, whether you'd like access to more classes and what kind of topics you'd like covered in the future, etc. So we would love your feedback. Please do fill those out if you have a couple of minutes. Australia has a vibrant creative community that informs, inspires and delights the nation. And in part, that is because the Copyright Agency has been standing up for creators since 1974. Copyright Agency licenses text and images to content users and ensures content creators receive fair payment for those copied works. Each year, Copyright Agency's members allocate 1.5% of the company's income to a wide variety of projects, assisting writers, artists, publishers, and the Australian cultural community through the Cultural Fund. We would like to thank the Copyright Agency for their support of this event. And now to introduce our trainer for today. Alison Sandy is a multi-award winning journalist who has been lodging Freedom of Information applications since starting her career 20 years ago. Alison joined the Seven Network in 2014 to become the nation's first female FOI editor. Last year, she lodged almost 800 applications nationwide. On average, the Seven Network puts to air 3 FOI-related stories a week. Alison is a fierce advocate of the media's role in holding governments and its representatives to account. She has successfully fought and won several appeals for access to documents under FOI laws and uncovered details that have contributed to positive changes in legislation. Some of Alison's more successful investigations include revealing the extent of child brides in Australia, where children are regularly being forced to marry much older men, and a year-long FOI investigation into the extent of sexual assaults across the nation's 39 universities. For the latter, she won an award from the United Nations Association of Australia for the promotion of gender equality, empowerment of women and girls. Most recently, she has taken on the role of executive producer of the global hit podcast, The Lady VANISHES. So I'll just throw this over to Alison in a moment and we can begin the session.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming today, for putting on your computer today. I really appreciate it. I want to thank first the Walkley Foundation and the Copyright Agency for supporting these workshops, and particularly with FOI, which is something that I really am passionate about. For me, freedom of information is about holding governments to account, which is imperative, and I always talk about these laws. The freedom of information laws are linked with I guess personal freedoms and what we have in our country as a democracy, and you'll always notice that freedom of information in countries such as China and Russia, it's not obviously something that they endorse, but it's always the direct correlation with personal freedoms that we get to enjoy. So without further ado, I shall start off. All right, FOI for journalists. We'll go to the next one. Thank you, Marcus. All right, so who am I? How did I get here? Just briefly. I was born in Victoria, but I started off in Queensland. I went to secondary school up here. So I did my bachelor here, and started out part-time based at Bulletin Redland Times. Then I went down to Victoria. That's where I made my first FOI application at the Portland Observer. You could imagine the local council, Portland's only 10,000 people, local council getting a freedom of information application from their 21-year-old journalist. They were quite surprised, and certainly I don't know if they'd ever had one before. So that was a bit of a baptism of fire for them and me, I guess, in some respects, because you know, we came head to head a lot. Then went to Win TV in Mildura, Quest newspapers back in Queensland, Sunday Mail in Adelaide as a political reporter, Channel 9 in Adelaide, Courier Mail Brisbane, where I started to really specialise in right to information. I became their right to information editor, and then the Seven News Network 6 years ago, where I became the freedom of information editor, and that's for the network, so nationwide, where I cover Queensland, Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia, and Western Australia. All right, next slide. Thank you, Marcus. Excellent. Okay, what is freedom of information? So I've provided this to give you a bit of an indication of where you sit, where New South Wales sits compared to other states. Now, the age of the Act is a direct correlation with how easy it is to use and how, I guess, as far as freedom of information goes, how well it works. So both New South Wales and Queensland have the newest acts, 2009, and both, as a result, are the best in Australia, much better than all the others that you see before you. The Federal Act is just a joke. Same with Victoria. Victoria is the worst of all of them. I know that there's a healthy competition between New South Wales and Victoria. Well, I tell you what, hands down, FOI in New South Wales is much better than Victoria. So you'll see there you've got a $30 fee. That's the only thing that the Federal Act has over you, is that there's no application federally, and arguably there shouldn't be a fee anyway, really. I mean, they should all be free to make the application. Obviously, once they start the process, it's different. But $30 fee in New South Wales, and comparatively, for me, New South Wales, the Government Information and Privacy Act, GIPA, is the best act to operate under in the country. There's a lot of pros. My favourite one with GIPA, and nobody else does this, if they don't process your application within time, which is 30 days, you get your money back, the $30 fee back, which is terrific. So they will apply for extensions, etc. But if you don't give them an extension, or they just don't remember to ask, then yeah, that $30 fee is that basically. So it's a good. A lot of encouragement there for the agencies to actually comply with the law and the timeframes, because timeframes are one of the biggest obstacles with freedom of information, and of course GIPA. All right, next slide. Thank you, Marcus. All right, so how to apply under FOI legislation. Unfortunately, one of the downsides with New South Wales is there's no online portal. So Queensland, South Australia and Victoria all have online portals, which makes it a lot easier. You can pay by credit card online, and a lot of agencies, sadly, a few still in New South Wales, will only take cheque or money order when you make an application, which is ridiculous and archaic, and obviously another deterrent for people to use them. But yeah, it's just the way it is. It's annoying. But we have a checkbook at Seven, which is good, and I have one at the Courier Mail as well, which makes it a lot easier. It's a very big process, excuse me, to get, you have to get 2 signatures, so it is difficult to get checks, and then you have to obviously send them via post, and that's been quite annoying as well, with having to rely on snail mail to send it. So yeah, this is one of the obstacles that you have in New South Wales, but a lot of them do take credit card as well, but yeah, obviously it would be better and much more user friendly is if they all took credit card and you could make all your applications via email rather than having to write a letter. So how do you write a letter? So I'll have my pro formas for every state, but the most important thing is that I'm applying for, so dear sir, dear madam, whatever, I'm applying for information under, and you have to quote it, the Government Information Privacy Act in brackets 2009. So that is mandatory. You have to say that when you're making your application, and you have to include the fee, whether it be by money order or cheque or credit card. Some of them do take BPay. So yeah, that's another thing. So you have to do that. You also have to say what you're looking for. So I am looking for information or documents containing this information, and then be as concise as you possibly can be. The important thing is to make your scope as easy to understand, and for them to as accurate and limited as possible. So, for example, if you're asking for information under the GIPA Act, you say the sorts of documents you want. So I'm asking for documents containing this information, specifically the documents I am seeking. So the sorts of documents that would hold that information. For example, if you are looking for police, you're applying to New South Wales Police for drug driving tests, and you wanted to know how accurate they were, and I guess the statistics on how many people have been caught. New South Wales is the only state that has cocaine testing, so it's good to get a breakdown then on the types of drugs that have been detected as part of these tests. What else? You want to know where they were being detected as well, a breakdown of the area, which will be the police district or the LSAs, which I think is in New South Wales, that they have them. So, and then the overall stats. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a runny nose, but no COVID. So anyway, this is these are the sorts of things that you would need to include in your application, specifically what you want. So I usually say I'm after these types of documents, and I'll say reports. Reports pretty much covers everything. Statistics, ministerial briefings and attachments. Depends, with that one, that would probably cover it. Maybe audits, reviews, if you're looking for accuracy of drug tests. But yeah, that would pretty much cover it. And then you'd go, and then after you've said what sort of documents, you say, I would expect the information I'm seeking, or the documents I'm seeking, to capture this. And then you say specifically what you want, because they need to know. Not all of them are painful and trying to just block you. A lot of them, with stuff like this, they're more than happy to help. So, say specifically what you want from these documents. And then, please exclude duplicates, documents that have already been publicly released, such as media statements, or publicly released, including those under the GIPA Act, but also media statements, media releases, media reports, and correspondence with media. I always exclude. Again, up to you. You can exclude drafts. If you're asking for ministerial briefings, you can say, if there's a lot on the same topic, just give me the latest, because a lot of those ministerial briefings will go into background, and for every ministerial briefing, I'll say, this is the background and this is what's up. So you don't need every single briefing along that. So that's what you do. Other things you could always put in there as well is to exclude personal information, such as names, addresses, because you won't get that under the GIPA Act. And if you're looking for AV material, which is CCTV and television, obviously that's really, really important. CCTV, body-worn camera footage, then you'll say, blur their faces. So personal information, you expect they would blur their faces. But that, yeah, I think that's pretty much all you need to do. Then you have to say, enclosed is the fee of $30. And that's it. Sign it, and that's your application. It seems quite complicated. And usually, if I was there, I would walk you through it, or I could provide you with an example. So at the end of this webinar, my email is there, and if you want me to send you a pro forma of an example FOI that I've made, I'm more than happy to do that. I mean, a lot of people, I think this is an important tool for all journalists, and I think it's good that we can all make these applications. I mean, there's enough, news and things to go around. There's enough. I mean, people often say to me, "How do you come up with ideas?" I mean, there's so many ideas. How do you not come up with ideas? You can Google any government department and have a look at what they do, and come up with, a dozen applications you can make for the information, from them. And a lot of the time, you don't want. It should be a last resort. If you can't get the information out of the media units, then you do GIPA. But the reality is as you know, media units aren't often helpful, which is why you need FOI in Australia to get information that they won't provide, because a lot of it is just routine, you know, just getting stuff that the government should be provided. And a lot of governments will say we have open government, so we show you this information, but whenever you go onto those open government websites, it's really hard to interpret the data that they have. You're sort of overwhelmed with information. It's not in bite-sized pieces, which you need for media, which is very specific. So GIP is an important tool. New South Wales comparatively isn't too expensive, which is good. So, but you know, it's still expensive enough. So doing it off your own bat, you really need a media agency preferably to kind of back you with these applications, that they'd be interested in paying for it and obviously running it when you get it. All right, next slide. Okay, so what can you apply for? So government, obviously we know you can GIPper any agency in the New South Wales government, Treasury. The favourites are New South Wales Police, of course, Transport for New South Wales. I love Transport for New South Wales. Health. The thing that with New South Wales, though, there's only so much held by New South Wales Ministry of Health. Then you've got all these agencies under them. So if you want hospital data, for example, if you want assaults in hospitals or you know, drug thefts or something like that, you have to go to the agency. So you're looking at the Sydney Local Health District, the North Sydney Local Health District, the Southwest Sydney Local Health District, the Southeast Sydney Local Health District, and then there's a separate one for Westmead. It's just incredible. So if I make any applications to health in New South Wales, I have to make about 6 applications to sort of cover just Sydney. So it's yeah, it's a bit arduous, and it can be quite involved, but if you're just cutting and pasting the scope, it's not so bad. But again, all of them I need checks for, so it's a bit of a pain. So you can see the types of documents you can apply for, as you can, you know, internal correspondence or just correspondence. You don't have to say internal correspondence. Now, if you're going to go into those micro documents, such as emails, text messages, things like that, you're going to have a pretty tight time frame. That is really involved. And also, if you're going to go to correspondence, you then usually have to say who, because they're not going to search the whole agency in their correspondence, for example, particularly with emails. You should say like the department secretary or a hospital, the chief executive or something like that. So again, it's about being as definitive as you possibly can in your applications. You will find that a lot of them will come back, and no matter what your scope is, because it's sort of their first, I guess, countermeasure, that they'll come back and say, oh, we don't know what you mean exactly, and it looks like whatever you're asking for is too onerous for us to process, so you need to change your scope or amend your scope. Now, under the Act, it is their job to assist you in this, in getting a scope that can be processed. So, you know, if you need, you know, questions answered, like, you know, well, because a lot of the time it's very ambiguous, I should say, what they'll put in the as to the reasons why they can't process your scope. So they should explain, okay, well, if there are thousands of documents captured, well, what are these? Where are these? You know, can you give me a bit more information so that I can exclude those? Because you know that they're going to apply the broadest possible interpretation to make it so that it's too onerous to process. So this is really important. Just so you know, government agencies are one thing, but there's so many other universities, obviously, they're public agencies, anything that is basically taxpayer, ratepayer funded in its entirety, not partially so, not that gets grants or something like that, but is a public agencies. So NGOs, it's always been a bit controversial in relation to as to whether they should be subject to the Act. Some of them that have joint, you know, public and private, they won't necessarily, well, the public arm of it would be subject to the Act, but not the private arm, and that can be a bit confusing. But, you know, universities, local councils have a plethora of information that can be quite interesting. You could get pothole payouts, which is obviously always a popular one. You know, how many people successfully sue the council for damage to their cars or vehicles or accidents that occur on dodgy roads with, you know, where they hit potholes. So that's always a really good one. And then vice versa, how many do they sue for causing damage to their roads, or, you know, like trucks and things like that. So councils as well. You could pretty much Google, if you're unsure, just Google whatever agency or department or you know, corporation or whatever that you're interested in, and just, you know, put GIPA there and you'll find out. So yes, AV materials is really something in TV that we really need. But I know overwhelmingly in newspapers as well, with websites and that. I mean, when I left the Courier Mail, they wanted moving pictures as well as stills. So that's always a bit of a trickier one. It's a harder one to get access to, but it's about limiting it. It's about saying to them, look, I don't want you to have to search every incident where police were assaulted, for example, in, you know, over the past year. Just give me the most recent 10 where there's no legal action pending or something like that. They might argue, oh, but we still have to go through them all to find that. So it's just a case of finding a way to do it. Well, okay then. Well, obviously if we go back to 2019, then they're mostly likely finalised. So just do the first 10 of 2019 or something like that. You just have to work with them. It's very much like pulling teeth. So yes, as I said, other people's personal information, names, addresses, phone numbers, this can't be accessed under the Act. So if you're interested in a prisoner who, you know, is getting free or is getting out of jail or something like that, and you want to know, I guess, specific details about them, it's a lot harder. You can't, you know, because it's individual. But if you said all prisoners that are getting out of jail early or something like that and did it as a broader thing, and then de-identified incidents of this, then you could get that. But, you know, specific information about individuals, that is really complicated, unless they're a public elected official or something like that, or someone who's on the public purse, like a senior public servant. But again, it has to be in their capacity working, not as a public or as a private person. So if they're, you know, going to strip bars, you know, unless they're paying for the strip bars on the public purse, then you're not going to get that sort of information. All right, next slide, thank you. All right, exemptions you're likely to encounter. Oh, these are fun. So personal privacy of individuals, yes. So it's a realistic exemption for them to have, which is why, if you know, unless you have the permission of somebody to make the application on their behalf or something like that, it's realistic that will be exempt. Legal privilege. Any legal advice, again, an exemption applies. It's really hard to get around these sorts of exemptions because it's pretty specific in the acts that is you know, something that they have to comply with. Now, deliberative process, this is not a concrete exemption, meaning it is subject to the public interest test as to whether or not you can you know, mount a good argument as to why it should be released. Deliberative process is the advice given to, for example, in a ministerial briefing note, to a minister on a decision that they want to make. So, for example, in New South Wales, when it was about the curfew being lifted, late night precincts, and you know, all those sorts of matters that came out. There would have been advice given based on information that they'd received about the precincts and the curfew and all the issues that come out of it. So they will often say, we recommend blah, 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 because of blah, blah, blah. That's deliberative process. And that, in my, you know, I don't think that should ever be left out. Like, I don't think there is ever an argument for that to be made exempt. There was, in Queensland, the former Premier Campbell Newman wanted to get the deliberative process exempt without there being any, it being subject to a public interest test first. And he argued that officers, senior public servants, couldn't give frank and fearless advice if they weren't, if they knew that it was subject to right to information legislation. So he tried that and he failed, thank goodness. Funnily enough, a lot of people don't know necessarily what FOI is, but if you write a story about how the government is trying to keep stuff secret, they get really upset about that. So that didn't happen, and unfortunately, deliberative process is, and federally, that there's been, you know, the moves by the government to try to block that information as well. But can you imagine it? I mean, you think about when the minister does go against the recommendation, well, why do they do that? Then they have to explain themselves. I mean, there might be a conflict of interest or something, and you know, it's ridiculous to think that they could try to keep that from the public. So always argue for that. Confidential communications, again, somebody tells us this, a lot of the time they'll just say, oh, you know, we're told in confidence, well, that people expect that when they're talking to us that it would be in confidence. And we're saying, well, has there been any confidentiality agreement or something like that? You know, give us a break. So I don't usually accept that one. Again, subject to public interest test. Law enforcement security provisions. Well, again, a lot of that can be used on such spurious you know, reasons. Like they will say, you know, law enforcement security provisions that you know, they'll give away the way police do operations or something. And it's like, well, hang on. I mean, that's not giving anything away. People know they do this. So I always fight for that. Cabinet information. Here's a really important one, I think, with cabinet information. It is not exempt unless it is actually produced for the purpose of cabinet, unless it's actually a cabinet submission or something that, you know, is specifically meant to go to cabinet. So if a document comes up and they decide that it's really controversial and send it to cabinet, that's not exempt under the Act because it wasn't produced specifically for cabinet. So again, worth fighting for. If it is produced specifically for cabinet, it is exempt, but it is used, the cabinet information clause is used as an exemption way too liberally. So it's worth fighting that one. Prepared for Parliament. Well, if it was prepared for Parliament, again, it's like if it's specifically prepared for Parliament, but if you know that's sure, then it is exempt. Information given in confidence, the same sort of thing as the confidential communications. Was there a confidentiality agreement signed? One of the things I find where that happens a lot is where Australia Post, for example. So Australia Post, you know, one of the favourite ones that people ask me to do is, oh, let's find out lost mail, how much mail gets lost or delayed or, you know, ruined or whatever. And you think that would be pretty straightforward, but no, unfortunately it's not, because they have contractors that do all this. And they will sign an agreement with, well, the contractors sign an agreement that all the information is commercial in confidence, and it's very annoying. So getting Australia Post, which we all know can be, you know, pretty hopeless, is a tough one because they've managed to sew it up so that that information is not accessible under freedom of information. They're quite clever that way. So will adversely impact interstate, international, interdepartmental, interagency relations. Again, it can be applied incorrectly. So I usually question that. The only ones I won't really put up a fight for are personal privacy of individuals, as in names, addresses, phone numbers, that sort of thing, and legal privilege. If it is clearly advice, legal advice, then yeah, I don't try to fight that one. All right, next slide. Public interest test. So what is it? How is it applied? So there are arguments in Queensland. I don't know if this is the case in New South Wales, because I just know the public interest test. They have the example of what things that the public servant needs to consider and what, whether it's the pro and the anti arguments. So I basically, you don't have to go into those details as to why it's in the public interest. You just have to say that arguments favouring disclosure outweigh arguments favouring non-disclosure. That's all I ever put, because it's going to be independently determined. If you're having to go to review, it's going to be independently determined by someone else who is just going to, you know, weigh that up themselves. So the review process isn't as complicated as it needs to be. What about so yeah, it's what do I say here about the decision about the public has a right to know out of government's hands because ultimately there's a conflict of interest. So yeah, there's all these reasons. Obviously, you can give us examples though, depending on what you're asking for, as to why people need to know this information. But again, in New South Wales, the IPC, which is your independent reviewer, is the best in Australia. I'll explain that a little bit further on though, but it's a much more robust system with the IPC, which is just terrific. So you're in luck there. All right, next slide. Okay, so as I said, an external review, you've got the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, and I know you'll probably do federal applications as well. The federal process is, as I said, is really, really difficult in comparison. You can tell by the age of the Act being, almost 40 years old, but also the OAIC is so woefully underfunded that they take forever to do external reviews. The IPC, by comparison in New South Wales, is pretty good. And one of the reasons for that is the IPC doesn't have to make a new decision on behalf of the agency. If you go to an external review, all they have to do is make a decision as to whether the agency needs to make a new decision. So they'll come back and say that the IPC's recommendation is that the agency doesn't need to do anything, or that the agency make a new decision, and they'll say why in it, which is fantastic because they don't then have to worry, like in Queensland, they don't have to worry about going to court. Like if the agency doesn't agree, or in Victoria, they'll take them to the equivalent, the NCAT, New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal. In Victoria, they'll take them to VCAT, in Queensland, they'll take them to QCAT, and then they have to argue it. They have to get lawyers and everything. In New South Wales, they don't do that. If they go to, if the agency doesn't agree with the decision, it's up to you as the applicant to go to NCAT, and it's relatively cheap. It's $104 compared to Victoria, which is 600 and something. It's just ridiculous. So again, relatively cheap, much easier if you're being bankrolled by a media agency though. But NCAT is, again, really robust. It's very liberal compared to VCAT, the Victorian counterpart. It's really a really good agency. And you can do it on your own. You don't have to get a lawyer in to help you. I mean, for the really important ones, like the stuff with the lady VANISHES, I do get a lawyer, but otherwise I do it myself. So when would you go to external review? Once you get a decision, you can only do that once you get a decision from the agency. So up to you. If you're not happy after 30 days and don't want to wait any longer, you can go to external review, but it does still take longer. So I generally give them the time they need to do it, particularly during COVID-19, which has taken a bit longer. So then they'll do that, process it. If they're being difficult with scope, again, just remind them of their obligation under the Act to actually assist you as the applicant to narrow scope. So the best way to do that is talk on the phone. Say, look, let's have a chat, agree to a scope on the phone, and then put it in writing. I always say, something you should mention in your applications, say to all communication be via email. Again, make it a bit faster. Otherwise, there are some agencies which will insist. New South Wales Ambulance, for some reason, was doing this. They would insist on sending me all my correspondence in the post. And then I basically had to say to them, look, as an applicant, I get the choice of how I want to communicate. So I want to do it by email, send me everything by email. So yeah, it's just one of those annoying situations that you have to deal with, and you have to actually say to them, this is not on. And, when it's like doing any round, they kind of know whether they can mess with you or not. So anyway, I sent back a very stern letter saying I wanted emails. Then you get the scope net organised, and then they'll come back with a charges estimate of what they expect you to pay, and you pay half of whatever it is. Again, it's usually pretty reasonable, but you can negotiate them down. You can say this is too much. Why is it this much? And say, look, well, what's been captured? Tell me what's been captured, and then you can work on narrowing it further so that you can get a reduced amount to pay. We're able to choose once. And then once you determine that they're happy to go with the amount, you then pay the half, and then we'll complete the processing, and then you pay the other half at the end of the processing, and then they'll send you whatever documents. So then if you're not happy with whatever you've gotten, if they've blocked all the good stuff, you go to external review. Other states have an internal review process, but when they do have internal review processes, I don't bother. I just go straight to external review, particularly in New South Wales, because it's such a good agency, the IPC. So then you refer it to IPC. Now, again, you have to write a letter, email them a letter saying, "Dear Sir, Madam, I'm applying for external review under the GIPA Act, the Government Information Privacy Act 2009. And then you say the basis of my review application is," and the easiest thing is just to say that I don't agree that the exemptions have been applied correctly, and arguments, and neither has the public interest test, and arguments favouring disclosure outweigh arguments favouring non-disclosure. You don't have to go into a lot of detail because you're not privy to the documents. You don't know exactly, you know some stuff, the exemptions applied to the information that they're blocking, but you can be pretty broad in your application. IPC will come back, they'll say that they've referred it to somebody, and then if they've got any questions, I'll get back to you. But then otherwise it's just done. Now, if the agency comes back, the IPC comes back, it's supposed to be within about a month, 40 days sometimes. If they come back and say, we think that the agency should make a new decision, which happens frequently, the agency then has to reply whether it's going to or not. And they'll do this by internal review if they're going to make a new decision. But more frequently than not, particularly with New South Wales Police, they'll say, no, I'm not going to make a new decision. So then you have to go to the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal. And that process, again, is pretty straightforward. They have a compulsory conference to start with, which they'll basically indicate whether or not there's going to be some avenue for mediation with the New South Wales Police, for example, because they're the ones I go to NCAT with the most. And then they'll kind of give me an indication whether or not they will, negotiate. A lot of the time, when you take them to NCAT, that's when they make a decision. They make a new decision by internal review. Often they won't until you go to NCAT do that. And I guess that's just, there's a few reasons, but I think it's internal bureaucracy more than often than not. And it's funny with New South Wales Police, like a lot of agencies, they're good and bad. Like they'll be really bad for a while and then something will happen. They're just like, well, let's just do this. And then they're good. And that won't last long. And at the moment they've been bad for a while. So it's just an ongoing fight with them, but we get there. So it's just something you have to do. All right. This is just so you know, it's very weird just talking and not seeing anyone, so it's a bit of a new experience for me, but at least I get to be able to do this in shorts, so that's terrific. All right, next slide. Stories come out of it. So yeah, I mean, on average, not this year because of COVID-19, but we'd had about 2 to 3 FOI related stories go to air a week. And yeah, it's really good because, as I said, you're getting information that you wouldn't normally get. So lodge about 500 applications across the nation a year. You do the quick hits and then the long, like the low-lying fruit, I suppose you call it. So things like crime trends, laser arrests, where they point the laser at the police helicopter, taser cam, they're always good footage if you can get them. Red lights, speeding, mobile phone hotspots, where you're most likely to get fined, etc. I mean, these are all good consumer stories that people like. Surgery delays, they're always fun. School assaults, etc. The things that are hard are child safety under FOI, under the GIPA. Child safety is a nightmare. I did get it the first year with New South Wales, but it's been increasingly hard to get since. Whereas AFP with child brides, it's been pretty good. But as well as being just quick hit stories, it's about also crucial contributions for big investigations. So we'll go to the next slide. So one of those that I did was the hunting grounds. And that was when I did an FOI across the whole nation on all the universities. And it was interesting because obviously I'm going under all the different acts. So federally with ANU, but then state-wise, all the New South Wales universities, the Queensland. So New South Wales and Queensland, I got a lot of information from. Victoria, it was like pulling teeth. Monash and Melbourne University were not fun to deal with. And you had their lawyers, you know, sending you these like pages and pages of questions. It was really an experience just from seeing how FOI worked in Australia. But I guess the biggest questions come out of it, not only what we did capture, but what we didn't. So we were able to see how rigorous, I guess, they were with their policy of, you know, keeping universities safe from sex assaults, with what sort of records they kept and how they followed up with their investigation. So it was a really good one, and it really shed a lot of light on the deficiencies in the system, and we were able to get a universal model put in, well, as a result, a universal model was put in for all universities across the nation. So a lot of good can come out of these sorts of investigative stories, which is terrific. And I guess that's why we become journalists, and it's about, you know, using your power for good, I suppose, and you know, getting positive change. So there was that one. And then the next one, next slide, please, Marcus, the lady vanishes. Okay, so this is something that's ongoing. We started this at the beginning of last year, the podcast into this. And in a nutshell, Marion Barter, who's in the picture here, she went missing 23 years ago. Her daughter's been looking for her ever since. And she actually had applied, to the federal AFP and to New South Wales Police for information under the FOI Act, so under advice, and she was having trouble with it, and that's how she came to me. Somebody advised her that I could help her, and ever since then I've been helping her with applications. And what we've learned as a result is that all the things that she supposed were going on, things like that New South Wales Police spoke to her mother and she wanted to go missing voluntarily, were untrue. So the investigation was botched, and we uncovered the truth, not all the truth yet, so we're still fighting for it. But you know, we had to go, ended up in New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal, and as a result, all this information's been gleaned, and now we're just waiting. Well, the investigation's been relaunched, and we're now just waiting for New South Wales Police to provide a brief of evidence to the coroner, which should have been done a long time ago. I mean, they didn't even refer it to the coroner within the time frame they're supposed to. So the coroner didn't even know about it. It was just bizarre, because they just decided that she'd been gone missing of her own volition. And Sally's like, well, where is she? Like, there's no proof of life. So anyway, it's a whole complicated thing, but feel free to Google it and you can find out all about it. But yeah, so we've been to NCAT once, and that was in relation to documents on the investigation into Marion Barter prior to November 2018, when we first made the application, and now since as well. So yeah, watch his space. But an inquest decision is due at the end of July. So hopefully they won't extend that any further. All right, next. How is FOI changing? Okay, well, this, it's, I guess, how's the media changing as well? It's the cost is going to be the biggest impediment for journalists if they're not being bankrolled by media agencies. So that's a big deterrent, but not, as I said, as bad in New South Wales. Queensland's by far the worst. Funding and resources, so being able to get, you know, that assistance, being able to follow FOIs. If it's a personal thing, like for example with the lady vanishes, it wasn't, obviously it's not Marion, but it's her daughter. Because I was looking for documents on her daughter's behalf, I was able to access more than I would as a media agency. That said, they still blocked a lot of stuff that they shouldn't have, and yeah, that's why we had to fight for it. They certainly won't want to release stuff that's going to make them look bad. So that's what you have to do, you know, fight for it. So government crackdown, all the Shine the Light on the Truth campaign that we did last year, Annika Smethurst, everything that's going on. They're not. They don't like they like to control information. They're like, you know, it's one of those things, isn't it? They don't want you to know what they don't want you to know, and they don't want to make things easy for you. So federally, it is horrible, as I said, the FOI process, but New South Wales, it's good. Again, thanks to your act. So it's definitely worthwhile using in New South Wales. But there's always going to be challenges, and it's just about making sure you can negotiate them and work within the parameters you have. And as I said, when you're doing, I feel like I've been doing the shift 20 years now. This is my round, so you get a lot better at it. But I'm more than happy to help people. I'm not here to poach or anything like that. There's enough FOI stories for everyone. And in Queensland, I think recently there was an FOI story that if it wasn't for FOI, it wouldn't have come out. And that was in relation to Jackie Trad, the minister up here, who seemed to have, or appeared to have, allegedly, interfered with the process of an appointment of a principal at a new secondary school being opened. And it was the Queensland opposition, you know, great, good on them, you know, and you know, I think it's great. I think anyone who can use FOI to uncover stuff, it's just terrific. So they were able to uncover text messages and everything that implicated the then Deputy Premier. So yeah, it's really important. A lot of people, Gareth Ward, have asked me to try and get information in relation, and the footage in relation to him in New South Wales. Again, it is harder with individual situations. It's not once there's been an investigation launched. If you can get there before ICAC, for example, and you know, the other trick is to broaden it out. You know, police referrals. We've got a few involving individual politicians, and they have to be consulted as part of the process. So you know you're going to have to fight for it. So you know you're going to end up in NCAT. So yeah, you just got to remember that when you're dealing with individual situations involving politicians. But they are subject to the GIPA Act because of the nature of their positions. They're working on the public purse, but it's what they do in their role, in their public role, not in their private role. So the Gareth Ward one was a bit of a, you know, well, he acting in his capacity as a minister? Well, no. So, you know, I've had those issues in WA with ministers that crashed their car, and I had to argue, you know, their work car. And I said, well, they're driving their work car. And they're like, yeah, but he's driving it in, you know, in his personal time. I said, no, it's still his work car. It's still taxpayer funded. You've got to give it to me. So yeah, so I had to fight for it, and I won. But yeah, you just got to know what your rights are. Okay, next. What time is it? It's getting late. We should start some questions. Anyone's got questions, start sending it to me. Let me just have a look. Okay, Nick McCallum, good to see you. Run into issues of privacy because they may refer to employees. What ways can we overcome this? Okay, so I mean, again, not knowing the context, but if you're talking about, you can obviously, when I write my applications, I will say to exclude private information like names and addresses. So if they say that, without knowing, as I said, without having the information in front of me, I mean, I wouldn't worry about the names of the employees. You don't need to know that. It's just the situation that surrounds it. And if you know who they are already, then great. But you won't get names in documents anyway, unless it is of a senior public servant or a minister or something like that. And then Nick, you've also said, how do we access information relating to a former minister when the minister has moved on from the role? Can they still be accessed? If they're still an MP, absolutely. If you're asking for information while they're in the role as a minister, absolutely. It's harder when they don't have an office. One thing you need to know is their offices, their wards are not, they're not privy, or they're not subject to GIPA. So you can FOI or GIPA their roles, or what they do in their role. If they're a minister, you can FOI the minister, or you can FOI even Department of Premier and Cabinet, because that will look at things that they do while they're in the role. It'll look at things that MPs do, or things will be reported to DPC about MPs and the minister if there are any issues, but you can't go to their local offices, their MP offices. They are exempt under the GIFA Act. Same with the Opposition Office. Go figure. I would have thought the Opposition Office could be FOI, but no. How do they access text messages? Well, they get their phones. Look, to tell you the truth, I don't know the process of how they search for things, but you do get text messages if you ask for them. When Channel 7 got raided by the AFP back in the day over the Chappelle Corby stuff, I got access to the text messages of the cops who did the job. So you just have to ask for them. And how they get them, I gather they just take them from their phone or how, I mean, and I say, well, can't they just delete them? But I think there's some sort of file that they can access, I don't know, but you can get that sort of information. And particularly in law enforcement agencies, it's not so easy. If they're working on a job, that sort of information is kept by matter of course anyway. With the Jackie Trad thing up here recently, they had the text messages that she had sent to that they got under FOI that she had sent to a high-ranking public servant. So yeah, so you just ask for them. But Martin, I've found that ministers and department officials are increasingly communicating via encrypted messages apps such as WhatsApp. Which, yeah, no, Martin. Sadly, there's no way to get around this. If people use WhatsApp, I mean, they've always, all ministers, the longer they've been there particularly, they will know ways to get around it, and they will use WhatsApp or they'll use any other account that they can to avoid it being FOIable. There's no way to get around it. You just got to hope that they don't know how to do that yet or something. But amazingly though, there is still lots of them who do it all on their official phones or whatever. So I know it sounds weird that, and a lot of it they will think is innocuous, but it's not when something comes up. So there's not a lot you can do to get around that. You can't make that happen, but you'd be surprised, as I said, how much is still put on their open accounts. Okay, Lara, looking for information about a centre on New South Wales University campus, which is in part privately funded and therefore exempt from GIFA. Oh, that's tough. How would you go about trying to ascertain such information? Is it possible to somehow go by the uni and try to find documents? Yes, that's how I would do it. I would go by the uni. For example, when I did the sex assaults on uni campuses investigation, all their colleges were exempt because they're separate from the university, whatever it is, but I just did it through police. So you just look for the agency, I guess, that oversees it or monitors it. So sex assaults, and then I have to give the address. So yeah, that's the way I'd go about that. Okay, Sawaba, hopefully I probably did not pronounce that properly, apologies. When you challenge a decision by a department to exclude information in your FOI request, what's the best way to do it? Does it always go to the process of, I gather you mean internal review. So when you challenge to include information in an FOI request, look, in the end, you don't have a lot of control over what they end up including in your application. Most of the time, they will block the stuff that you really, really want. No, not most of the time, but a lot of the time they will. So yeah, you will have to go to external review, but external review is free. So, and in New South Wales, it doesn't take forever. So it's not such a bad thing. It's used as a deterrent in other places like federally and Victoria because it does take forever. But New South Wales is not the case. So, you know, having that, it's well worthwhile doing. So it's just a matter of making the application for external review. And I'm happy to walk you through that. Just email me. Again, I'm more than happy to show you. I can provide, you know, kind of pro formas of what you need to include in these applications. First, the GIFA application and the external review if you want. So just let me know. Michael, do you have a recommended approach for situations where departments assert that documents contain materials subject to an exemption, i.e. they contain a cabinet deliberations, even when it is highly unlikely to actually be the case, but you can't access documents to argue otherwise? Yes, so Michael, that is the thing, and that's where you have to go through external review. So they will say in their decision letter, and you'll get it, they'll say that this is a cabinet exemption, and you can say, no, I don't agree with that. And then as per the external review, they have to look at all the documents. And again, thankfully, in New South Wales, the IPC will be privy to that, and they'll say, give us give us your argument that you've applied, and give us these documents, or show us documents, and they can then say, I don't agree, or you have to make a new decision. So just argue in your external review, make it, I just make it all encompassing. I just say that all the exemptions have applied have been done incorrectly, and that arguments favouring disclosure, sort of outweigh arguments favouring non-disclosure. But make it clear that you're not just applying, well, you don't have to make it clear if you just make it so that you indicate that you are questioning all exemptions, rather than just the ones subject to the public interest test. Okay, Shima, hey, you said you get text messages if you ask them. How do you know what to ask for? Are there any things we have access to? No, the types of documents we have access to is basically everything, anything in written form and in audio form. Anything that's a record, you have access to under the GIPA Act. So you can ask for anything. I always ask for reports, as I said, and I won't tend to do text. If I do texts and emails, I'll specify who to search, because if you ask for the texts and emails and don't specify who, they'll say, well, that's too onerous, because they'll apply that. They'll take the broadest interpretation and apply it to the entire department, which means, of course, it will be too onerous. So you need to say, just limit correspondence, searches for correspondence to this person, like the secretary of the department or the chief executive, and then give it a specific and a narrow time frame for that. So you can ask for documents on a broader time frame, but if you're after correspondence, I'd ask that on a much more narrow time frame, unless it's a very specific topic. Okay, Mia, in terms of cost, what is one of the most expensive FOIs you've ever experienced? Look, in Queensland, I would say, you get bills for, they'll try to charge you over $1,000. Not so bad in New South Wales, but sometimes that can come into play. Look, the Walkley Foundation's good with freelancers. I know that they were looking at, and I think they proceeded with this, providing grants to journalists to do FOIs. Sometimes with media organisations, if we're after the same thing, we'll pool our money for a lawyer. You don't need court transcripts you mentioned here. You don't need to FOI court transcripts. They should just provide that. You should be able to get that from the registry. I think the key is always try to get it through the agencies first. I think that's what I would recommend you do. Always try to get it, find out if there's a way outside of FOI, you can do it first, particularly if you're, tight with money. I'm looking at this, but I'm worried that FOI requests could tip a department about an investigation I'd like to do about a certain corporate arrangement. Yeah, look, the reality is, Wendy, it's better to do it before anyway. Like, it's important that you get, because once an investigation's launched, or they've realised how difficult or bad the situation could be, you're not going to get much. But it doesn't go to a very high level initially with FOI. Okay, so ministers will hear about your FOI applications, or they'll be given a copy. But I guess the penny's got to drop before they know. It's, as I said, you really want to get your applications in as soon as possible, as soon as you hear about something. If you want to get that information, because once the ship's already sailed, it's a lot harder. Justin, what options are available when agencies fail to return an FOI within the statutory timeframe? So yeah, so that's the external review through the IPC. So I'm happy to, as I said, send you an example of this. Just email me after, and I will forward it back. Nancy, how do you ask that they're sending you, how do you know that they're sending you everything you've asked for? Can they just say that? Well, you can do a sufficiency of search if you think that they haven't sent you everything, if you're aware of some stuff that they haven't sent you, or would think that they would definitely have more, you can say, I make an external review. Again, go to external review on the basis of sufficiency of search, and then they have to prove to the IPC that they've done the appropriate searches for it. So yeah, that's also sufficiency of search is another basis for external review. It's a good one. Yeah, I thought in Queensland you had to pay. Yeah, you have to pay for court transcripts, but that's what I mean. You go through the registry, not through FOI for court transcripts. Another question related to commercial confidence. Do you find this stands up very often in FOIs? Commercial and confidence. Sometimes it's a lot of to and fro though. It's worth arguing commercial and confidence. So it's really probably 50-50, I think. I don't know. I mean, for example, I used to get assaults and weapons offences on planes that would come in, or that got caught at airports. But because airports private, and I got it for the Department of Infrastructure, all the airports got arced up and said, we've signed a confidentiality agreement, blah, 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 that you're not supposed to disclose this information. I can't, as a result of them marking up, I can't get that from the Department of Infrastructure anymore because of this confidentiality agreement that they tightened up so that I couldn't get it. So yeah, it just depends. But it's, again, it's like with external review, you're not privy to the documents, so it's worth putting it in regardless. I think we're out of time now, but as I said, you've got all my details. Can we go to that with my email? Thank you, Marcus. Last slide. There we go. So copy down my email. If you have any other questions, or if you haven't had time to get it, just email Marcus. But email me with any questions, or if you want a pro forma just to use as a basis. I think every journalist should be using FOI. I have no problem with sharing my knowledge in relation to that because it's more than enough to go around. And it's not as though if you get tip-offs, it's whoever gets a tip-off, right? So you got to follow it through. I'm more than happy to help. And as I said, I'm not interested in poaching stories or anything. I just think that everyone should use it. And you don't even have to give me the subject matter. I'm more than happy just to help you with the outline of the scope argument. So anyway, thank you very much for your time. I want to thank the Walkley Foundation and the Copyright Agency yet again. More than happy, as I said, to answer any questions anytime. And, I'm glad that you're also interested. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Alison, and thanks everybody for staying on for the session. And once again, thank you to the Copyright Agency for making this event possible. Just a quick reminder that we will be sending out a feedback form shortly to everyone. And we'd love to hear from you about how you enjoyed the event today, and if you have any ideas for other topics that you'd like to see covered in any future online classes. Okay, thanks everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.